Ex-wife secretly moved to another city for her dream job, let toxic friends influence her, blamed me when life fell apart, then begged to reverse our divorce. About 8 months ago, my ex-wife Sophie, 40F, moved to a different city for a new career opportunity. She had been offered a senior management role at a tech startup she'd secretly applied to, without telling me. She kept it hidden because she knew I wouldn't support her moving away on her own, especially with everything going on at home. We had been together for 13 years, married for 11, and we share 9-year-old twins. Both our families are rooted in our hometown, and about 4 years ago, my mom was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. Since then, life has been an emotional roller coaster. Her condition has been slowly worsening, and as her only child, I've been helping my dad care for her. Moving away wasn't an option. I needed to be there for them. I thought Sophie would understand that, but instead, she told me I was being overly emotional. She argued that I couldn't keep passing up career opportunities and expect her to do the same just because my mom was sick. Before my mom's diagnosis, we had actually talked about moving. Sophie had been craving a fresh start in a bigger city. But once my mom got sick, I made it clear that relocating was no longer an option for me. At first, Sophie seemed understanding, but over the past year, I noticed her growing restless. We started arguing more often. She felt trapped, while I couldn't imagine leaving my parents behind during such a critical time. I kept trying to explain my perspective, but Sophie refused to see it. I thought she was being selfish, while she believed I was the one holding her back. Then, earlier this year, she came home from work and casually dropped the bomb. She had applied for a high-paying job in another state, and she got it. I was blindsided. I wanted to be happy for her, but I couldn't. She hadn't told me anything about it. I remember standing there, in complete shock, forcing out a congratulations, but inside, I felt betrayed. That night, we had one of the worst fights of our marriage. She accused me of not supporting her dreams, while I couldn't understand how she thought it was okay to make such a big decision without even talking to me first. She admitted she didn't think she'd actually get the job, but now that she had, she wanted to take it, and she expected me and the kids to come along. We argued for hours, and it got so bad that she left and stayed with her sister for a few days. We didn't talk during that time, and honestly, I thought she might be preparing to file for divorce. But she came back. We sat down and talked, mostly about the kids. Despite everything, I still loved her, and I didn't want our marriage to end. She said she felt the same, but also didn't want to give up her dreams. After days of back-and-forth discussions, we made a difficult decision. Sophie would take the job and move, while I'd stay behind with the kids. She promised to travel back and forth as often as she could so we could make it work. We didn't see any other option but to try a long-distance marriage for now. It was tough for me to agree, but I went along with it, hoping we'd eventually figure out a long-term solution. So, she left. She came home every other weekend, but even then, she only had about 2 days with us before flying back on Sunday evening for work on Monday. I knew how draining it was for her, but there wasn't much I could do. It was the arrangement we had agreed on. But over time, things started to change. I noticed her attitude toward me shift. She seemed more irritable, and whenever I called her during the week, our conversations felt strained. What started as quick check-ins turned into heated arguments over trivial things. Eventually, it felt like she didn't even want to talk to me. I stopped calling first, waiting to see if she would reach out, but she rarely did. Our conversations became less frequent, and when we did talk, it was cold and awkward. I didn't know what to think anymore. I should have seen it coming. Not only had we been arguing constantly, but Sophie had also reconnected with an old friend from college. Let's call her Vanessa. Vanessa was always a bad influence. She had been a bridesmaid at our wedding, but I never liked her. There was something off about her. From what I knew, Vanessa thrived on drama and had a reputation for dating wealthy, married men, enjoying the perks without any intention of settling down. She even bragged about it like it was some kind of achievement. When I brought this up with Sophie, she dismissed my concerns, saying it was Vanessa's life and her choices, and that I was being judgmental. That response infuriated me. Eventually, I gave up trying to talk about Vanessa and just ignored their friendship. Over time, it got easier, especially after Vanessa moved to another state and Sophie got busy with work and the kids. Naturally, they drifted apart, but I found out that Vanessa had been living in the same city Sophie had just moved to for her new job. She'd relocated there after her third divorce, probably looking for her next wealthy project. So, when Sophie landed her new role, she reached out to Vanessa, who helped her settle in and introduced her to the area. I was there too, helping Sophie move, and I couldn't ignore how quickly she and Vanessa reconnected. I had hoped that after all these years Vanessa might have changed, but she was still the same toxic person. It made me uncomfortable seeing Sophie get so close to her again, but since Vanessa was the only familiar face Sophie had in the new city, I didn't say anything. Over the next few months, as Sophie settled into her new life, their friendship only grew stronger. Sophie told me that Vanessa had been incredibly supportive since she moved away and was living on her own. Vanessa had even introduced her to a few of her friends. This so-called circle that Vanessa brought Sophie into was questionable, to say the least. From what I remember, it was a small group of 3 or 4 women, all single moms who had connected through an online community and formed some kind of support network. At first, it sounded harmless, just women helping each other navigate tough times. But as Sophie shared more about them, I realized there was more beneath the surface. These women had all been involved with wealthy men, had children with them, and were now raising those kids alone after the men left or were pushed away. It sounded tragic at first, but the reality was much messier. Most of these women were like Vanessa, gold diggers who had pursued rich, married men, gotten pregnant, and then secured massive child support payments. But it wasn't just for raising the kids, it was also hush money. These men didn't want their wives finding out about their affairs, and these women knew how to use that to their advantage. They often claimed they were self-employed, running vague online businesses no one really knew anything about. In reality, they were living comfortably off child support, pretending to be independent while manipulating the system. They even called themselves empowered women, living life on their own terms, but it was all built on lies. Sophie found it amusing. I found it disgusting. I didn't think it was a good idea for her to be around them, but every time I brought it up, she defended them. She told me I was being judgmental and that, despite their pasts, they were kind and supportive. We were already fighting so much that I didn't push it further. I didn't want to start another argument. But everything boiled over during our last big fight before the divorce. Sophie told me how much she admired Vanessa's strength, raising 2 kids alone without help from any man. I couldn't help but scoff. I told her that anyone receiving that kind of child support after an affair could take care of kids just fine, especially when they treated the children more like meal tickets than actual family. That comment lit the fuse. We exploded at each other. Months of bottled-up frustration came pouring out. We yelled, we cursed, we blamed each other for everything. Eventually, she snapped and shouted, "If we're going to fight like this all the time, maybe we're better off apart." Then she hung up. I thought she didn't mean it. I figured she'd call back, apologize, and we'd try to fix things. But she didn't, and I was too angry to call her first. That weekend, she showed up with divorce papers. In that moment, I realized I couldn't come up with a reason to stop her. We had tried, really tried, to make it work, but it just wasn't happening. Even the kids, the ones we told ourselves we were staying together for, barely got to see us happy. And when we were together, it was tense and miserable. So, rather than force them to grow up in a toxic environment, we decided to end it. The divorce process was surprisingly straightforward since there's no waiting period in our state. All we had to do was split our joint assets, which wasn't too complicated. I kept the house and full custody of the kids because Sophie didn't want to uproot them. She said, for now, we could stick to the arrangement. She'd come back every weekend to visit them. We had already been splitting the cost of raising them, so we continued that. We agreed that when the kids got older, they could decide for themselves where they wanted to live. It wasn't an ideal setup, but neither of us wanted a messy custody battle. We both believed the kids deserved to have both parents in their lives, even if we weren't together. As for the house, we verbally agreed that in a few years, we'd put it on the market and split whatever it sold for. The divorce was finalized about a month ago. I didn't expect Sophie to reach out afterward. Even during the process, we barely spoke outside of meetings with our lawyers. Now that everything was official, I was trying to adjust. In some ways, it felt like nothing had changed. We still followed the same weekend routine, but in reality, everything was different. I was no longer married to Sophie. The kids were confused, of course. I had to sit them down and explain that their mother and I weren't together anymore, even though, on the surface, things still looked the same. But then, out of nowhere, Sophie called me last night. She was crying, completely hysterical. She wanted to talk about giving our relationship another shot. She told me she'd made a huge mistake and wanted to undo the divorce. She started rambling about how she'd glamorized the lifestyle that Vanessa and her friends were living. Apparently, that group had played a huge role in her decision to file for divorce. She hadn't told me before because she knew how much I disliked Vanessa, but after our last big fight, she'd gone to them for advice. They pushed her to go through with it. She was hesitant at first, but they convinced her, even recommending a lawyer. Now, a month later, she realized how miserable she was. She'd tried everything to move on, dating apps, blind dates, nights out, but it only made her feel emptier. She'd end up hooking up with random guys, and then feel disgusted with herself. She said that even when we were arguing, at least she knew there was love between us. Now, all she felt was loneliness. And more than anything, she missed the kids. Her friends kept telling her the loneliness would pass, but it hadn't. On top of that, her job wasn't what she expected. When she first joined the company, they painted a perfect picture, steady growth, great pay, but now she'd had multiple pay cuts. It turned out they had exaggerated their success just to lure her in. It wasn't just her. Everyone at the company was going through the same thing. Management kept promising things would get better, but she felt like they were just stringing employees along to keep them from leaving. All of this, the loneliness, the guilt, the job disappointments, made her want to come back. She begged me to consider reversing the divorce. She said she missed her family and wanted her old life back. As she spoke, I felt nothing but anger. I couldn't believe she'd let her toxic friends talk her into this. I had warned her about Vanessa and her crowd from the start. I told her I didn't trust them, and now they were the reason our family had fallen apart. If this had been entirely her own decision, maybe I would have felt some sympathy. But the fact that she let people I despised influence her, knowing exactly how I felt, made me furious. And now, she was crying to me about how hard everything had been for her, like I was supposed to feel sorry for her. I snapped. I told her she made her choice, and now she had to live with it. I wasn't going to help her fix this. I had tried so hard to make our marriage work, not just over the last few months, but ever since my mom got sick. I had been holding things together for so long, and she threw it all away. But Sophie had been incredibly selfish over the past couple of years, and that's how we ended up here, divorced. The least she could have done while living away was try to understand my feelings and the situation I was in. Instead, she allowed herself to be influenced by friends she knew I didn't like. I told her she wasn't a teenager anymore, and blaming her friends for her bad decisions was childish. This wasn't like sneaking back home drunk to her parents. This was real life. Her choices had deeply affected me, the kids, and now, just because things weren't working out the way she thought they would, she wanted to reverse the divorce. First of all, that's not how life works. Second, even if it did, I wouldn't go back. I was furious after hearing everything she had told me, and I couldn't hold it in. I told her that if she was feeling so lonely and guilty, she should ask her friends for help. After all, they were the ones who pushed her to file for divorce. Surely they cared enough to help her now, financially and emotionally. What really pushed me over the edge was her confession about hooking up with random people over the past month. Technically, she was single and could do whatever she wanted, but it disgusted me. It made me feel like the 13 years we'd spent together had been cheapened. I told her I didn't want her back in my life, especially after hearing all that. I also told her I would fight to keep the kids with me because I no longer believed she was a good influence on them. She broke down in tears, saying she was willing to do anything to fix things. But I was done. I told her that she had made her choice and now had to live with it. I told her the kids, and I didn't need her anymore. Then I hung up and blocked her number. The next morning, I woke up to several messages from my ex-in-laws. They told me I shouldn't have said those things to Sophie, that she was already at her lowest point and I didn't need to kick her while she was down. They thought I had been unnecessarily cruel, especially since she clearly regretted her decisions. Normally, I wouldn't have cared what they thought, but they'd been kind to me after the divorce, so now I wasn't sure. Was I the bad guy for telling my ex-wife I didn't want her back and that the kids, and I didn't need her anymore? Update 1. It's been 4 days since I posted. I blocked Sophie after that heated conversation, so she hasn't been able to reach me. But this weekend, she's supposed to come over to see the kids, and honestly, I don't know how that's going to go. Ever since the divorce process started, she's been coming over on weekends to pick up the kids and take them to her parents' house. Sometimes, we'd all spend a bit of time together for the kids' sake, but she mostly avoided me, which actually made things easier. This weekend, though, I have no idea what to expect. I'm dreading it, to be honest. Her parents have been upset with me since that last conversation. They told me Sophie has been crying every time they talk to her. I haven't responded to their messages because I don't know what to say. Here's the thing, I know Sophie. She's not an overly emotional person. So, for her to be breaking down like this means I really hit her where it hurt. And despite everything she's done, how selfish she's been, how badly she messed things up, I still feel bad for her. We could have had a great life together, and I can't help but feel like she ruined it all for herself. I did everything I could to make our marriage work. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't keep it together on my own. Update 2. I don't even know what to say anymore, to be honest. Sophie came over yesterday to pick up the kids, and we ended up having a long talk. It was obvious from the moment I saw her that she'd been struggling. She looked completely drained. I could see the toll everything had taken on her. Despite everything that happened, I found it hard to be cold. She asked if we could talk for a bit, and I agreed. Once the kids were in their rooms, we sat down, and she really opened up. She apologized, not just for the past few months, but for the past couple of years. She told me it had taken the divorce for her to finally realize how selfish she had been. She even said she didn't deserve me. She talked about how, over the past few weeks, every time she went on a date or had a casual hookup, all she could think about was how empty it felt. She wasn't sure if this was the life she actually wanted. She admitted she had glamorized the single, independent life in her head, but the reality was nothing like she imagined. And by the time she realized that, it was too late. She had already lost me. She broke down crying. I instinctively reached out to comfort her, but she stopped me, saying it would only make her feel worse, reminding her of how much she had taken me for granted. It was bittersweet to hear her say all this, something I would have appreciated back when we were still together. Now, though, I didn't know how to feel. Then she told me she had decided to quit her job and move back here to be closer to her family and the kids. She realized how much she had been missing out and that it wasn't worth staying in another city, working a job that paid less than she'd been promised, while losing precious time with her children. Her only request was that I not file for full custody like I had threatened during one of our heated arguments. I reassured her that she didn't need to worry. I had no intention of actually taking the kids away. I had said those things out of anger. Both of us had always agreed that the kids shouldn't suffer because of our mistakes, and I knew they missed their mom deeply. After our talk, she apologized again and told me I was a good man. She promised to be a better mother and a better person, and she thanked me for even letting her talk to me instead of slamming the door in her face. That hit me hard emotionally, but I didn't say much. She left with the kids after that. Honestly, I didn't expect things to go that way. I thought she'd show up ready for another fight, but it was an honest and peaceful conversation. I'm not saying I forgive her or that everything's okay now, but at least we're moving in the right direction. I don't think I could ever go back to being with her. That would be unrealistic after everything that happened. But we can focus on co-parenting and making life as smooth as possible for the kids. Let's see what the future holds. Update 3. It's been 4 months since the divorce, and since my last update, a lot has changed. Sophie stayed true to her word. A few weeks after our conversation, she quit her job and moved back here. Since then, the kids have been splitting their time between us. Half the week with me, half with her, and it's been working out surprisingly well. When Sophie first came back, she stayed with her parents for a couple of weeks while figuring things out. Eventually, she found an apartment just a few blocks away. The kids love it. They're actually excited about having 2 places to call home now. My ex-in-laws and I are back on decent terms. We don't talk often, but they did apologize for how they reacted when Sophie had her breakdown. They admitted they lashed out at me because they didn't know how to handle the situation and were just overwhelmed with stress. I get it. It was a tough time for everyone. Sophie and I are also on civil terms now. I wouldn't go as far as calling us friends, but things aren't tense anymore, which has made co-parenting so much easier. We keep things cordial, and that alone has been a huge relief. As for me, I'm slowly but surely moving on. I'm still processing everything that happened, but I'm focusing on the future. Things have been going well so far, and I'm hopeful that they'll only continue to get better from here.